Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. While we have a tendency to focus on what's going on in the US and North America and Europe, today we wanted to take things global and specifically to the country of India. And we're lucky enough to have Priyans Murarka joining us today on the podcast to share all about his experience as an EV owner, amongst many, many other things, and a road trip haver as well in the country of India. So thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing? It's the evening there, it's the morning here for me.
Thank you, Francie, so much for inviting me for the podcast. I am doing well. Thank you so much. And just at the outset, I would like to mention that I am a huge fan of Out of Spec team. I've been watching their videos for a very long time, and they have been one of the, they've been like, they've kind of forced me to buy an electric vehicle. All the YouTubers like Kyle, Bjorn, everyone. So thank you so much.
I love that. Forced you to get an EV. And we're definitely going to jump into that in a little bit and describe, help you tell your story of like how you decided which EVs and everything. But before that, I wanted to give the audience a bit of an overview of what I know about you because you have a
Sure.
lot going on, and you have a podcast, you have a blog, and like I said, you do many other things. So let me describe those. So a bit of an overview on you and how you got into um, all of this, because like I said, yeah, you have a great blog post that describes all the work that you do. You have a podcast as well, and it describes your beginning. So I wanted to say also that I think you're a great writer, and it was really nice to read a bit about your story. So thank you for putting it on paper. I
Thank you
do
so
love
much.
reading, of course. And basically, so as I know it, this all began when you first, well, I guess you were watching Out of Spec, but then you bought your Moonlight MGZS EV of 2022. And you bought that in April of 2022. And there was a long wait to get it, but you were patient enough. And then you planned out your road trip. You used PlugShare and you set out on the road. And you created you have created since then as well, incredibly detailed reports of your trips, and you have extensive analysis as well. And I think it's
Yeah.
just really fascinating, and I really appreciate the effort you've put into all of that. And everyone will share links to Priyon's everything, but also if you're comfortable with those Google sheets that you make that
Yeah.
have just all of the data, so you can because folks can model their trips off of what you're
Exactly.
doing as well. Yes. And then aside from that, you are also a co-founder of Active Buildings, which was founded in 2017, I believe, and
Yeah.
you make indoor air quality sensors and service customers by advising them on how to improve it, which I think is really important as well. We've seen more and more pressure to do that. Your work also includes the socially responsible brand Sarva, where you make
Yeah.
low cost air purifiers and work with CSR groups to install them in public spaces to benefit the public as well. And we're not even done yet. You also work with Siddharth with the Veditam India, Foundation, a research and media organization out of Kolkata, India, where you
Yeah.
work at the intersection of environmental, cultural, and social challenges. And I love that intersection as well. And you focus on the rivers and the life around them. You tell the stories of, the life around these riparian ecosystems. And like I said, I will link out to everything. And it is really interesting to see the work that you do. And I must say, I've been talking for a minute now, listing the incredible work that you find yourself doing. And it's very hard not to admire your work ethic as well, and the mission behind your work. So I am, again, so glad to be speaking with you today. And is there anything I missed in that list of your busy and admirable activities that you would like to include?
Thank you so much for this very long introduction. Uh, yeah, I mean, outside of that, I like to play board games, which is a very dear hobby to me. And yeah, I mean, the amount of work that I put in and the amount of videos that Kyle puts out, it's vastly different. Like I will not be able to put out that much content or work in different companies, but Kyle will just keep pushing out content after content, which is like insane. So Yeah,
That's true. There's a lot of content created on the Out of Spec team, which does take a lot of time. So I
yeah,
understand how you are already pulled in a lot of different directions, but still you manage to create, create in general a lot of things. So
yeah,
um, I'd love to start with the mission of the work that you do specifically around your EVs. And, I
hmm,
know you currently own two EVs. So that's the Moonlight
yeah,
MG ZS and then the Tata Tiago 2023. And,
yeah,
first, I mean, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how you got into EVs. Of course, I touched on it briefly, but then,
yeah.
yeah, the motivation behind your work of really documenting it all and being so data forward.
Sure. So the way it happened was that I had like our family had a Wagoner, which is like a city car for about 20 years now, and we were in the market to buy a new car. And given my work around like even Veditham or active buildings, right, both involve somewhere like I'm somewhat close to the environment. I like the outdoors, and I would want to ensure that I am not polluting outdoors. So I decided that if we are going to buy a new car, we have to buy an EV. So it was slightly difficult to convince my parents about it, but like it was still very straightforward. We took a test drive. They loved it. I loved it. So I in fact took a test drive of multiple cars, but the ZS EV was where all of us, like our entire family, was very comfortable with. So that is why we went ahead with the ZS EV. And so what happened was that we kept both cars for a while, the Wagoner and the ZSEV. uh, Over a period of time, like my parents, like, so basically in India, like, we live in a joint family, or we live with our parents, so we share cars. So my parents would never take the ZSEV out. Sorry, they would never take the Wagoner out. They would always take the ZSEV out. So I was left to drive the ZSEV, wherein I wanted to drive the electric vehicle. So we decided that okay, it's time to remove the Wagoner and get another city car. So that is why we got the Tata Tiago EV.
I see. Okay. So, yes, there was a little bit not enough EV to go around. So,
Yeah, yeah.
instead of getting another Moonlight, you decided to opt for another EV. And why was that? Because you did seem to like the ZS. So maybe it was, you could just
Yeah.
duplicate it, but instead you decided to branch out. Why was that?
So there are two reasons. One, in India, Tata's market share in the EV space is around 70-75%. So they have a huge number of EVs, and the Tata Tiago EV is also approximately one third the cost of the MGZS EV. Uh, or at least 2.5 times cheaper, right? We like my parents, they don't road trip as much as I do. I take the car like across India. Like I've driven to the north, to the south, everywhere. But my parents, they prefer driving in the city. So for them, like getting a city car with a less mileage is also okay. So this is like, let's say that it is like one of the cheap, like it is currently the cheapest EV that is available in India, and it works out great, like cost wise also.
That makes sense. Different needs for different
Yeah,
EVs and people in the family. And, I think it is a bit of a challenge with folks with families to find EVs that work because sometimes you're hauling a lot of people and a lot of,
yeah,
their luggage in whatever way. So you need a little bit difference in range. And I also wanted to, so I hadn't mentioned yet, but your work is called Experiences with EVs, right? And so
yeah,
that's where you can find you online in a lot of places. You can see it right there as well.
yeah,
And you did share this data sheet with me, and we'd love to share it
yeah,
with folks. And so, experience with EVs road trips, and there are many different tabs here. So
sure,
they describe. I mean, it's a lot of amazing data. So a lot of your different road trips and
yeah,
um, yeah, I really a lot of data, right? You have beginning state of charge, departure state of charge, the kilowatt hour added during charges, which chargers you used along the way, and the plug share links, and so much more. The cost of the sessions, the elevation, And from that, I'm sure you've been able to gather a lot of general information about how your EVs are performing. And I think a lot of our audience might not have experience driving EVs in India specifically,
Yeah.
right? Where the infrastructure is different from the US, but I'm ignorant to that. I'm not sure how different. So maybe I'll give a few specs about your EVs and then you
Mm.
can describe kind of the actual setup of how it's been to drive
Sure.
EVs around India. But so with the Moonlight, you described that it has a about 50.3 kilowatt hour battery. It's around 33,000 USD. The efficiency, you've noted it on different trips, but I have seen that it has pretty good efficiency. Do you agree?
Yes, it's around 8 kilometers or 8 kilometer per kilowatt hour, or
Right.
around, I don't know how much is it in miles.
It's like
Yeah.
4 to 5 miles, I think, and which is
Yeah.
pretty good. And
Yeah.
then the Tata Tiago, so that's a 24.2 kilowatt hour battery, less expensive, more around 13,000 USD. And uh, again, I wasn't sure about the efficiency on that one based
Yeah,
on
yeah,
your
yeah. So
data
that
sheets. Mhm.
efficiency would roughly be around 10 kilometers per kilowatt hour. So uh, that is how many miles?
Let's see.
Is around 6 miles, 6 miles per
Nice.
kilowatt hour.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's a very efficient car.
Yes, we
Yeah.
love the efficiency. And tell me how that has played into your travels. Because I know in your first road trip, you wrote about that it probably wouldn't have been possible if you didn't have this doctor that helped you get that
Yeah,
charging. And how has
yeah.
that changed since you've first got an EV, first road trip till now? So, yeah.
Yeah. So in India, we have a predominantly CCS2 network. All cars, except a very few old ones, everyone is on CCS2. So we do not have the NACS problem, or multiple charge ports problem in India. So we are lucky that way. Outside of that, what happens is that most cars, the mass selling cars, right? They are at around 30 kilowatt or 50 kilowatt hour battery packs, not more than that, and they charge at a similar rate, at a 1C rate. So most chargers that you see in India will be around 30 kilowatt chargers or 50 kilowatt chargers. You will see very few, one, like you will have like handful of 180 kilowatt or 150 kilowatt chargers, not more than that, because you have very few cars that can take that kind of power. And as so around the cities, the network is still pretty good. As you go slightly more in rural areas, the network goes bad. For example, I have actually sat down and calculated the number of chargers that are there in the country, and that comes out to be around 4,000 CCS2 points that are available in India. Um, and if you compare that with 6 months ago, so this data is from September 2023. In Feb 2023, there were around 2,500 CCS2 guns. So in 6 months, the charging infrastructure is almost doubled. So
Mm.
that the point is that the infrastructure is growing very rapidly. Uh, and if you talk in terms of the areas, right, North India, West India, and South India are pretty dominant in the charging infrastructure. Central, East, and Northeast, there the there are not many EVs, and there are not many charger infrastructures too. So that is where the charging infrastructure is. So my first road trip that you were talking about, right, that was in May 2022. And now if I have to take that same road trip, probably I'll have like a couple of more choices on that road to charge.
Wow. Okay. So that is rapid expansion that you're seeing
Yeah.
just in the same year to double the infrastructure and totally change your road trip from a couple months ago to now.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are the main drivers? Is it the government, or is it private organizations that are putting in this infrastructure?
So it's a bit of both. I mean, government is doing their part by allowing some kind of subsidies, or they are promoting charging infrastructure. But like private organizations too are taking in a lot of effort. Right, in India, on my phone, I have 50 plus apps with different chargers.
50
With
plus?
yeah,
That
charging
is too
apps.
many
I mean,
apps.
it's also because I'm an enthusiast, right? I mean, I would
This
have
is
those
true.
many apps because I want to study all of them. But a typical road tripping person, they would hardly have like 5 apps. But still, 5 apps is 4 apps too many, you know.
And
Uh,
I agree.
so yeah, so I mean that is a challenge that we're facing right now. But most charge point operators, they are working on something to ensure that all charges are at least visible on single app, like or on everyone's app, so that maybe may that will help the users, because we are really fed up. You have like different login credentials for each app, and then you have different wallet systems, right? So that is a problem. But I am hopeful that in the next 12 months this problem will be solved in India, or at least to a great extent. So
Yes. Yeah, that is a challenge of really finding the central way to go about it to make charging more accessible, because no one wants to be having, we have that problem here too, where there's a lot of apps you could be using depending on which network you're charging, and some of them have interoperability that works, but
yeah,
it does take a lot of effort on their end to find the agreements that they can do that, where you can use, the ChargePoint app to charge at EVgo or vice versa. And
yeah.
yeah, okay. So very interesting. And then are the chargers provided mostly, do you see, I know that they all have the same connectors,
Hmm.
which is convenient, but are they
Yeah.
typically the same hardware, or do you see variety of hardware along your routes?
There are at least 2 to 3 major brands, international brands, in India. Also, there is an Indian brand that manufactures chargers in India and now is exporting to the US too. So I mean, there are again a lot of players. So a lot of moving parts. Like in India, electricity is a state subject. So each state will have different rules about electrical grid connections, and then you have a different charger OEM, and the chargers need to have SIM cards, they need to have internet, and then you have different kinds of cars that are coming in. So there are a lot of moving parts, but the industry, I hope, is working very hard to solve the problems.
Yes, I mean, and over here too, we see different, excuse me, hardware and equipment, and sometimes you can know what kind of experience you're going to get from it based off of your previous experience. But some folks, they don't really even pay attention to which charger they're pulling up to. But of course, that is not the case for you. And have you now kind of, as an expert, you've become an expert
Mhm.
in your community and online. And how has that, have you had success in folks transitioning over to electric, or are there still mostly hesitations? But with the growing infrastructure, it does seem like people might be more and more assured that there is a place where they can charge their EV.
So, what has happened is that before electric vehicles, I was never a car guy. Like I wouldn't be able to distinguish between two SUVs or two sedans. Like I was the wrong person, right? But as I started watching content, and as I started learning more about electric cars, I like it has become that anyone in my peer group, or like anyone in my circle or my friends circle, right, if they are purchasing a new car, they'll definitely talk to me and ask me and sort out their concerns. They'll have certain restrictions that I want to be able to do this, I want to be able to do that, and I then tell them that okay, this is possible, this is possible, this may not be possible, and then based on that they make their decisions. It is still very difficult to convince people in India, because it's still like the industry is barely 3 to 4 years old in India, the electric vehicle industry. So we are still in our very nascent stage. The sales numbers will go up soon, but one more limiting factor is that the cost of the electric vehicles in India is slightly more than the comparative ICE vehicles. But when you compare the total cost of ownership, that goes down. But people just see that initial cost, and they are slightly more hesitant. So
Yes, definitely. The cost driver is, I think, big for most people looking to switch over, because not only are they looking for something that matches the convenience that they know in their ICE vehicles, but hopefully a
mm,
budget that they have in mind as well. And sometimes they just don't match up in the EV offerings. So that's Interesting that you've been able to be a source of knowledge that you maybe
Yeah.
wouldn't have expected yourself to be before. Definitely, a bit of a personality change. But when you get into EVs and emerging technology, it can be so, enticing and exciting to learn about. And I want to talk about specifically, considering how you're
Hmm.
living in a place that has such a fresh EV industry evolving, in terms of the infrastructure and everything. What are the main lessons learned about EV ownership so far for you?
Hmm. Planning. Planning is critical. Uh, there are still some routes wherein you will have to stop at dedicated points, otherwise you will not be able to complete your trip. It is also very important to know your car, basically to deep discharge your car as much as you can, so that you know that you build that confidence that you can pull into a charger at 1% or 2%, out of spec style. So that is something that has to be done before someone takes a long road trip. And uh, like I keep telling everyone that you have to use PlugShare, because PlugShare is the single source where you have all the charges listed and you have the reviews that are coming in. So if everyone starts using PlugShare more, it becomes a reliable source of information for everyone. Right now, we don't have any other way to know whether a charger is working or not unless you download the app and then see what the status of the charger is. So, uh, yeah, so planning is critical. Rest everything like you can figure out while you're, as you take more trips.
Definitely. Planning is key. And I would imagine PlugShare is, like you said, really important to share that information. And in the EV space, I think there's so much of that, which I really admire. And especially if folks are really going to be traveling out in a spot where they're not exactly sure how the charging will be, to be able to rely on recent reviews is very important. Have
Hmm.
there been any road trips where you have found yourself in a bit of a sticky situation in terms of running too low and perhaps getting stuck anywhere?
Uh, so I have reached particular chargers at like 1%, 2%. And there was one time wherein it took me some time. It took me 15 minutes of talking to the CPO to get the charger working. So that was a bit of a problem. And like I had a range of what, 5 kilometers, or and the nearest charger were at least 10 kilometers away. So I wouldn't have been able to make it unless like I would have to slow charge my car for some time. So that was once. Outside of that, there was like I I put I started my car, like I reached a particular charger. I started charging there, and my high volt battery just shut off. Like, I mean, it was because there was like the car demanded a certain amount of current and voltage, and the
Mm-hmm.
charger was able to give like a certain amount of current and voltage. These two conversations, like, I mean, they were not matching. So that is why the battery decided that it is not safe to charge, and it shut off. So that has happened with me once, but outside of that, it has been a very pleasant experience. I've encountered a few broken chargers, but uh, given my background that I'm an electronics student, right, I could check, okay, this fuse is blown, or this MCB is switched off. I would just switch it on and then it would start working. So I am confident of doing those things, but I would not expect any regular person to do that. So yeah, I've been lucky that way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, your background does give you a few skill sets when you're really in a bind. But yes, of course, only do that if you're Priyans, I'll say. But otherwise, be
Yeah.
careful. But that's, yeah, it does sound, I'm really glad to hear that it is a positive experience and that you're able to, you've traveled quite long distances and do it successfully. And who doesn't run into a charger here and there that has problems? Unfortunately, that is too much of the narrative, of course. But it sounds like you're actually having quite a good bit of success getting out on the road and really kind of probably disproving a lot of insecurities and
Yeah.
attitudes that people have that it is too hard to have an EV, perhaps where you live or in general, and showing actually I do. And so, can you tell me a bit about the range of your EVs and
Yeah,
if they were advertised at a certain range and if your data matches up with that?
correct. So the Moonlight, right, the MG ZS EV, 50.3 kilowatt hours, it gives me a real world range of around 400 kilometers, which is around 300 miles. And The advertised range was around close to 470 kilometers. So slightly more they had promised. But one thing to note is that in India, we drive a lot slower, in the sense that I drive at a maximum speed of around 80 kmph, because our roads are not that safe, in the sense that we have narrow roads, we have people coming from the wrong side. It's chaos. Like, if autopilot comes in India and it is successful, it can work everywhere in the globe, right? So yeah, I mean, that is one thing that helps me with the range. So 400 kilometers is a decent amount of range. And in my Tata Tiago EV, that is mainly for the city ride, that with traffic it gives me around 200 kilometers, so around 150 miles. So that works out pretty well for me too, because Bombay, like, I am originally from Mumbai, so Mumbai has a total length of like 50 kilometers, slightly more than that actually. So that, I mean, it covers the entire city, so that's not a problem at all.
Great. Okay. And so it sounds like, there might be a little bit of discrepancy in that advertised range compared to what you're getting, but
Yeah,
it is working out for you. And you do have pretty efficient EVs, and the fact that they're getting
yeah.
pretty good real world range for what you need is, again, good news. So love to hear that. And again, yeah, just drawing back to the data that you gather, it's definitely aligned with Out of Spec, where you might be sold a car that says this and that, but to put it to practice. And you've talked a little bit about your main lessons, and can you share with our audience, your and me, most importantly, your plans for the future? I know on your blog you mentioned you have perhaps your longest road trip coming up, right? And then
Yeah.
whatever else you might have planned. Yeah.
So, I mean, that longest road trip could not happen because I had to move to Delhi for work. So, I am currently in Delhi. But I have been exploring places around Delhi. Like, just last week, I went to Jaipur. This coming week, or next week, I'll be going to Chandigarh. So, there are shorter trips planned around in my car. And in Delhi, it gets really cold. Like, I mean, not Colorado type cold, but still, it gets like, it's one of the colder cities in India. So I want to take my car into the Himalayas when it's extremely cold, and do a range test there. Uh, and Himalayas are like one of the tallest mountains in the world, so that will be something that I'm very much looking forward to. And it will happen in a few months or so, like around December, January.
Oh, really? That is incredible. That I would love to have you back after you do that to discuss your findings, because I know that you've tracked your elevation before, but like you're saying, yeah,
Hmm.
those are very tall. I'm sure it'll be colder as well. So to see how that
Yeah,
performance is, right? Okay. So how are you
yeah.
preparing for that, if you have started yet?
So the idea is that I would take shorter trips, not not to the like not to my destinations, but somewhere close to that, in different weathers, to see. Right now, it's still not winter yet, but in a month or two, it will be slightly colder. So I'll do shorter plains road trips. That way, I'll understand whether the temperature has any impact on the battery, because in Bombay is tropical climate all year round. So I have not seen that. I have not seen the temperature impact yet. But in Delhi, I'll be able to see that. So I'll do some trips in the plains to see what kind of range I'm getting, and then based on that, I'll plan my Himalayan trip.
Very cool. Yeah, I would love to hear more. And I just wanted to show, in case folks are tuning in on YouTube and are able to see this, but you have mapped out your EV road tripping here. And
Yeah,
this is like 30,000 kilometers that you've traveled
yeah,
so
yeah,
far
yeah,
with your EV. Very
yeah.
cool. And so, with your destinations that you choose, are you typically going there for work, or are you saying that would be a good one to just try out in the EV? How do you choose your destinations?
So most of it has been work, because that way I can, um, that way it also allows me to not feel guilty that I'm not working. So I reach a destination, I finish my meetings, and then I come back. So that is how it has been. So fortunately, like, my work allows me to travel so much that everywhere I just take my car and I go. So yeah, I mean, it has been for work, and as I mentioned, right now I would want to explore more in the northern part of the country, because yeah, I mean, I'm now in Delhi, so I can do that.
Great. Yes. Love being able to open up different locations based on where you're living. And I do want to highlight again that you have this amazing website, Experiences with EVs, and I will also share this tab so you can see it. But it points to, your blog posts, your
Yeah.
podcast, Whirring, which I think is interesting too. If you want to tell us a little bit about that.
So Ring is this short form content that I'm writing. So basically, GOM is basically, different cars have different types of GOMs, right? One will be a linear GOM and one will be a estimated based on your driving GOM, right? So I make my case as to why I prefer the linear over the other one. So that it's basically short snippets. Like, usually my articles are quite long, the road trips or any other point that I'm talking about, or even the charging infra that I'm talking about. But these are just short stories, right?
Yes, reading your short stories from the EV sphere, which I really
Yeah.
love, and I would recommend everyone to check out your stuff. It has been, pardon my dog, very interesting to read about your experience and kind of also challenge my ideas of what it would be like charging and driving in India. I have never
Yeah.
been there, so that's one thing. But yeah, extremely interesting. So you have your trip to the Himalayas planned. You will continue to gather this data and work on all of your other projects that you have going on in your life. Is there anything else you want our audience to know today that we could discuss?
Uh, Yeah, so it's simple, right? I mean, one of the reasons why I believe that everyone should write and everyone should put out this data is because if someone else sees this data, right, they know that okay, it's possible to do it, and or at least they'll have an idea. If even if I've had a bad experience, right, but others will know, instead of just sending a trip report on a WhatsApp or a Telegram message, right, it gets lost. But if you have some place where you're dedicatedly writing about it, it becomes very easy for someone else to find out, and so that their experience can be shared more widely. That is all I would like to say.
I agree. I totally think that that is your mission, which is to share out your experience and share it widespread. Because, like you said, yeah, a lot of the information can fall through the cracks, but putting it in one place like you do, and sharing the way that you document your trips with your data and your analyses, I think it is very admirable. Again, and thank you so much for being willing to share your story with us. I think it is very interesting. I would love to know if we have any of our audience that is in India or in any other countries where you're kind of, taking on the EV world as it's being built, as we all are in a sense, but at different scales and different speeds, definitely depending on where we live. And we'd love to hear more stories about this. I think that there is a lot of focus, like I said, on, the US and Europe, especially with our content, but there's so much going on out there and that I love to explore. And thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Francie. Thank you so much.
So we will see you next time on the Out of Spec podcast. I hope you enjoyed this story and the conversation with Priyans, and we will make sure to share all of his information so that you can find him online and follow along his journey, and hopefully have you back once you have summited the Himalayas in your EV.